Hi, I'm Joe Saunders from Miniature Landscape Hobbies, and in this episode I'm going to detail how to paint a really unique camouflage scheme from the Cold War. I'm going to show you how to paint the French FORAD scheme. Let's get to it. Miniature Landscape Hobbies is proudly supported by these sponsors. Okay, as historical miniature enthusiasts and miniature gamers, you're bound to have experienced this problem: the over-greenification of the hobby. What is this? Well, it's the tendency for miniature gamers from most periods, but especially the Cold War era, to paint everything they own some shade of green. This, of course, is practical because it mimics real-life military vehicles. And it's unlikely that I need to remind you of this, but since the advent of the tank, they almost have always been some shade of green. Sure, we have camouflage schemes to add a little variety, and for World War II enthusiasts, we have some visual mercy in the form of Dunkelgelb and Panzer Gray. But for the most part, we get green, and only green, and this is what we have to paint with. This state is enough to drive a tread-headed gamer to play Napoleonics, with some of the more goofy color schemes. This is where we pick up our story. My son Hastings went to Uganda for 4 months earlier this year to assist an NGO with sustainable energy initiatives. We were all very proud of his efforts, and I asked him what he'd like when he got back. And because he's my son, he decided he wanted a Team Yankee French army, which, of course, I duly collected for him. Upon his return, Hastings got to work building the army, but when he saw his color options, he was a little underwhelmed. It seemed he could paint the French force green, or maybe, well, really just green. Besides blending in with all the Soviet and American models we already have, this wouldn't be much of an artistic challenge. Then something unexpected happened. While buying paint for the project, Hastings found this image on an AK Interactive paint set. Blue-gray with black camouflage stripes on an AMX 30. He immediately decided that this was the scheme for him. What is this bizarre scheme? Well, it's actually real. It was used to represent opposing forces in French military training, and though the timelines don't really match up with Team Yankee, we figured we could get away with it. Let's face it, the system already takes some extensive liberties with things like M1A1 HCs showing up in the mid-80s, so I thought we should just go for the scheme. And we found out later that this pattern is called FORAD. We did, however, decide to go a little more gray than blue on the pattern, as we felt that it presented better on the tabletop. In this video, I'm going to present my method for painting the FORAD scheme. You could, of course, use this method to make this color scheme for yourself, but I see it more as a guide to show you how to break out of the green model funk and try something different. So with that out of the way, let's get down to it. What would be your ultimate bucket list item as a miniature builder or model painter? How about traveling to the miniature gaming capital of the world? For exclusive tours, discussions, and events with some of the top miniature companies in the world, including tours of Warhammer World and the Warlord Games HQ. While we're at it, it would be great to throw in some stops to the UK branch of the Battlefront Miniatures store and visits to other wargaming companies. On top of this, we'll see all the major military and historical sites in the UK, including a visit to the incomparable Bovington Tank Museum. Such a once-in-a-lifetime travel event is no longer just a dream, because from March 7th to March 16th, 2025, I'm inviting you to accompany me on this incredible trip. This one-of-a-kind travel experience designed for the dedicated miniature hobbyist and their spouses or guests is now available for my viewers. Please check the link in the video description. I hope to see you on the trip. As always with tanks, I start with a black primer, which I applied with a rattle can. Over the primer, I got out my airbrush and mixed a dark gray. This was then applied to all the armor on the model, avoiding the tracks. When this was good and dry, I felt some color modulation was in order. To achieve this, I went back to straight light gray and sprayed this top down, trying to mimic the effects of light hitting the upper surfaces of the tank and leaving the lower plates and recesses the darker shade of gray. Now I could move on to the camouflage itself. To do the black stripes, I chose NATO black and began applying these by brush. One thing to keep in mind here is that NATO black is not actually black. It's a dark charcoal gray, which is really what I wanted. Black is a shade that is most effective for building contrast on miniatures, so instead of using it here, I'll reserve it for later when it comes time to really define small details and maximum definition on each model. The majority of the armor was now well in hand, but of course it looked just a little flat, with just the color modulation on it. As a result, I decided it was time for a highlight. To do this, I chose silver gray. This paint is a nice off-white that has tones common to both the light gray and NATO black portions of the armor, making it a one-stop option for highlights. If I used a highlight color that didn't have some commonality to the paints under it, I'd need to highlight the gray and NATO black areas with different colors, and I didn't want to do this for the sake of speed. So now I just dry brush the silver gray on and use it to pick out the raised areas and edges on each vehicle. This brought the project to the cleanup phase. This is where you go back over any of the areas that have not specifically been painted so far with black. So I went and picked out the crew, tools, tires, tracks, etc. I also used black to pick out the vision blocks and lights on each vehicle as well. With the cleanup done, I got out white and began working on the details. To do this, I left the existing black from the cleanup phase showing around the edges of the tools and vision blocks. I just went ahead and filled in the middle of each detail with white, leaving the black border if possible. I chose white here because I intended to use speed paints on the fine details, and the white would work as a zenithal base layer. While I was doing this, I also dry brushed any visible crew white, but notice I left the tracks and tires black. When the white was dry, I began on the vision blocks. I layered on magic blue speed paint over the white centers of each block. For the prominent searchlights on the vehicle, I used Fire Giant Orange. This was done for a very specific reason. The blue-gray qualities of the vehicle were pretty overpowering and flat, so I applied a little color theory here. Looking at a color wheel, we see that opposite the blue-grays is orange. This would be a complementary color. Using complementary colors to offset the majority color on a subject creates a very nice visual balancing effect. This really helps with the visual interest for the viewer. So that's why the searchlights are orange. Lastly, to keep building a variety of colors, I picked out sensors and fire extinguishers in slightly thin slaughter red. While I had the speed paints out, I also worked on the crew. Camo green went on the uniforms, and 2 layers of Crusader skin went on the faces and hands. At this point, the batch of vehicles was looking good, but where there were wheels and tracks, these were still straight black. And the armor was also a little too pristine, so I moved on to weathering. I decided to keep the weathering as simple as possible, so I used straight acrylics. First, with a ratty paintbrush, I dry brushed mud brown over the tracks or wheels of each vehicle and stippled this on any spots that would be exposed to splatters. Then I followed up doing the same thing with grimy gray over top. The vehicles were now pretty much done, but since the project relied so much on dry brushing, a lot of the definition was missing on the model. To fix this, I decided to line in with the ever so awesome Tamiya enamel panel liner. To prepare for this, I sprayed each model with 2 coats of satin varnish. This helps the enamel flow on the model's surface and it protects my previous work. Then, with a broad flat brush, I gently brushed a thin coat of mineral spirits thinner over the model. While the mineral spirits are still moist, I then use the applicator straight out of the panel liner bottle and deposit the enamel straight into the crevices and recesses of the model. Between the varnish, the low surface tension of the enamel, and the thinner, the black lining goes exactly where I want it to create maximum contrast around each detail. Once the panel lining was done and dried, I applied 2 coats of matte varnish to each model. This was in order to provide a final layer of protection for the work and to reduce shine for photography. And with that, this project was done. Now Hastings' French Team Yankee army has a large number of vehicles to choose from. This not only offers him a great variety for the game, but the unique blue-gray camo sets his army apart from everything else on the table. Both he and I were very pleased with the visual appeal of these models, and this paint scheme was fast and simple to do. We completed the entire army, including a huge number of AMX 30s, in about 2 weeks, working just a couple of hours each evening. So, Hastings' French army is now ready for the tabletop. So I guess that means I need to come up with my own Soviet army list that can give it a run for its money. If you'd like to learn more about painting Team Yankee vehicles, please watch this video. If you'd rather learn about painting infantry for the game, then consider watching this other video instead. Thanks for watching, please remember to like and subscribe, but most importantly, remember to keep building life in miniature.